Yep, that's going to work, which is very nice. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So, I love this report because I think it's really important, and I really like the fact that it relates to the social compact. So when we think about a social compact, what are we talking about? If you think about the Hawke government, Prices and Income Accord, it was Medicare, it was superannuation, in order to get the support for really major industrial reforms regulation. There's a few people of my generation in the room and they might remember that period and just how big a change that was to that whole landscape of industrial relations and other things. But today, what's government expected to deliver? Jobs and growth, wage growth for people, or not so much lately. But they're also expected to deliver a whole bunch of in-kind services, and then social insurance. So if you think about a social compact, it's actually a combination of those sort of three broad categories. It's going to be how are they going on delivering jobs and growth, how are they going on delivering in-kind services, and are they providing the right kind of social insurance for people? So why does this matter? And I call this the burning platform number one, ageing. This is just a great diagram out of the Productivity Commission's 2013 ageing report. And I don't know, is that going to give me a beamer? This is just phenomenal. If you look at, this is was in 2012, our current profile of the population, and it's gone from, as they like to say, it used to be sort of a fat bottom tree into a coffin. So what's happening is, there's a whole bunch of people who are now in the dependent category, and by 2100, you're going to have this shape of lots of old people and fewer young people. We've got a big bulge going through in the baby boomers. You can see I'm one of them kind of working through the system. And hopefully by about 2050, you'll start getting to a more sort of balanced sort of growth, but you've got an awful lot of old people for quite some time. And dependents matter. So when you're thinking about the budget, you're thinking about how we're going to go back and support what kind of in-kind services, how are we going to have the jobs and growth that is going to support those people, and it's just going to get really hard if the tax base shrinks and expenditures need to rise. And so if you're not convinced that expenditures are going to rise, have a look at age-related spending. From the same Productivity Commission report, the big problem there is oldies cost a lot more than young people do, right? So education might sort of fatten out as we need to have, people have lifelong learning and the like in the future, but this is the big problem. This is the emerging problem, and this is on current policy settings, the projections, but they haven't changed them that much. And in fact, after this, I think this was when the pension went up, and certainly aged care has gone up a lot with the home-based services that we've had too. So we've got something to worry about. We need to do something about it. Burning platform number two, and hinted at, but not quite, stated populism. And we're having a very nice, interesting chat about Europe and what's going on there. And clearly the US has had some interesting issues. And one of the challenges is our rising tide of economic growth has slowed down. So you look at our terms of trade, and I didn't put the picture up here, but Australian income and our terms of trade have been very strongly linked, income growth and terms of trade. Terms of trade came off slightly but then strengthened again last year, hence we're moving into a surplus faster than we expected. But our terms of trade are still well above our long-term average. And so if it drops back down, if China really does cool down and we don't see growth in India to pick up the demand for minerals resources, our terms of trade will drop, and that's going to make it even harder for Australia to actually maintain those budget balances. We've actually, this little chart here, this one here, we've passed the peak share of population of working age. So working age has just been extended to 67, so that's going to extend out a little longer. Peter Harris, when he was chair of the Productivity Commission, wanted to push it out to 70, but that got pushed back. And so we're past that peak, which was hit in 2012. We also have the big problem that the rising tide has not lifted all the boats equally. This is a really interesting chart here, where this is the absolute increase in the income for the top 10%, and this was the absolute increase in income in dollars this was from 2012, I think. 2005 or 6 through to 2016. So the income has gone disproportionately to the people at the top. And so people don't feel like that they have benefited. And then so what we've got is a growing perception that the system is unfair. And that is really what's happening. And it's unfair intergenerationally. Housing prices are the things that people feel most when they're saying, you know, young people can't get into the housing market, but people who got into the housing market early enough are doing very well. So the wealth is becoming more unequal. And we've got a growing share of underemployment. So unemployment's low, which is a really good thing, but underemployment is higher. And even though our share of casual labour hasn't shifted, it's still stuck at around 25% and has been for quite some time, what that looks like to be a casual employee has changed. And so there's a lot more income volatility if you're casual, because you might be on 0-hour contracts, so you don't know what you're going to have from day to day in terms of income. So these are seriously, you know, kind of disrupting how people feel about things. And many households don't feel like the system is looking after them. So this is from the Productivity Commission's recent Rising Inequality report. I should say I was their principal advisor for 10 years, and so I still love their stuff. It's really good. And they just are encyclopedic when you look at how much work they put in things. But this is actually what's equivalised disposable income. And equivalised disposable income takes into account people's wage and salary and capital income, it then actually, and transfer payments coming from government, and then it subtracts off the taxes that they pay, and then it adjusts for how many people are in the household, right? So the more people in the household, it's not a one-for-one adjustment, because clearly it's cheaper for a household to support 2 people than 1 people, but it adjusts. And so you actually see, people tend to think that there's a lot of people here, but actually there's not. This is the 9th decile, is in the 73 to 90,000, and a lot of people are down here, you know, in this sort of below 50,000 kind of category. So the median income, or the median equivalised disposable income in households, is only at around the 45,000 kind of mark, which doesn't seem like a lot. So people are concerned. And then if you look at wealth, it's even more skewed. So people are feeling that they don't have a secure future. So this is actually taking into account housing wealth. It surprised me, because I thought if you take into account housing wealth, how can you have, people in Sydney and Melbourne? Surely lots of the houses are up around this mark now. But that's your top 20% there. And that's your bottom 80% in terms of wealth there. So when you actually look at the numbers, you kind of understand a little bit why people are feeling a little insecure. So social compact matters, and it matters a lot. So what does it really mean? It's the opportunity to work for a living wage. It's equal access to the sorts of essential human services that shape the opportunities in people's lives. And so people really don't care that much about equity of outcome. They don't care if somebody earns more than they do, as long as they had an equal opportunity to actually be able to earn something like that themselves if they should have wanted to. Now, we're not all born equal, but at least we should have equal access to healthcare, equal access to things like prenatal care, give kids a chance in life, to early childhood education, and to a decent education throughout it's now actually throughout your working life, I think, is the way it goes. People want affordable infrastructure services. They want to be able to access utilities. I think everybody knows electricity prices are the barbecue stopper, the hot topic, because people feel that they are entitled to, 1, have an access to that service, and 2, for that service to be affordable. And so if you look back in that diagram on household disposable income, and you start thinking about your electricity bill being, $2,000-3,000, that's a big chunk of your disposable income. that you're going to be worried about those kinds of things. Transport is another one, and particularly if you're living in the fringes of some of our big cities, very hard. And then housing, access to affordable housing and affordable rental housing are major parts of it. And then social insurance. So we've had discussions about North Queensland and recovering from drought, then flood, and the whole issue around what does the social insurance, how much is government going to play a role in helping to reconstruct? And we as Australians rely on that. We think that government should come in and play that role because we live in a society that's going to look after the people who nature has kind of whacked across the head. So that's very important. Unemployment insurance, we've talked about New Start, and age and disability insurance as well. So these are all part of this social compact. So there's a question of what's actually doing. And I just want to touch on the size of government being a matter of balance. It's kind of tricky, right? Because you've got what government is responsible for and what households are responsible for. And as a good, what are they called, neoclassical economist, you tend to think households are much better at making decisions about what they want than government is about making the decisions on their behalf, right? It's kind of a basic economics approach to doing things. But what if households have really different capacities to pay? Are toll roads the way to go? Are user pay on all roads, which is actually something that's been proposed, is that going to impact on those with the lowest income most? And then how do you, under a social compact arrangement, compensate only those people? Because you kind of want the roads to be used efficiently, and pricing is an efficient way to allocate roads. So there's questions around, how much you let governments make those choices and how much government. And then when you're in government, do you provide a means-tested service or do you provide a universal service? So preschool, for example, is a universal service. Primary and secondary education is a universal service. HECS, or the help debt, is a universal access, but it may not fully cover the costs of going to university. So you do have a user pays component there. Our medical system, is meant to be sort of universal to some degree, but we also know that some people can't afford to seek the services they need because they can't meet the co-payment and they can't get the service, without making a co-payment. So some really interesting questions about where does that balance sit and how do we trade off between efficiency and fairness. There's some other really interesting trends in our economy which also say something about the ultimate size of government that we need, is that a lot of the things that we used to do in households, we've now got the market doing. But surprisingly, most of them are things that government subsidises. So the big ones are care, right? Childcare, aged care, disability care. Increasingly, we've looked to the market to be providing those sorts of services, and they're subsidised as well. And even cleaning services for elder people might be covered by their home and community care package. So there's a balance issue there. And then there's another balance issue, which is about how much should government redistribute consumption across the households, right? And how should they go about doing that? So should you put an income test for, on income and wealth and support low-income houses that way? Should you tax rents or should you be taxing hard work? Clearly an efficient tax system is one that tax what we call rents, because nobody ever turns down luck, right? So if you make a whole bunch of money because you happen to get lucky, you got into the market at the right time or whatever, then you're not going to stop doing that if you face a tax. But if it's a matter of working really hard, you might ease off if you think you're going to face a really high marginal tax rate. And so those are questions that we're constantly having to grapple with. One of the concerns about means testing everything is that, will you get general public support for the quality of the services that are going to be provided to the people who are accessing the means-tested services versus if everybody's got access and we're going to care a lot about our schools being decent quality, for example. And then finally, how much should government redistribute across the generations? We've got young Australians, we've got old Australians. What's the future income of young Australians going to be? Remember, there's going to be few of them supporting more oldies. The numbers I saw is we're going from about 5 working age people per dependent to about 2 working age people per dependent. So if your average tax rate is now at around, 35% of income, does that mean that those people are going to have to pay 80% of their income to support those old people in taxes? If you're just taxing, if most of your taxes are wage income taxes, then that's kind of what you're looking at. So there's a whole bunch of sort of questions. So just to finish off, I think we need a conversation about the social compact. Where does the population want the balance? And that politicians need to start being brave enough to actually ask this question. Is democracy going to get it right? Is it going to get it right without having an honest conversation about it? I think there's some things that government can do to get a bigger bang per buck, and this is why I really like this CEDA report, because it just picks up a whole bunch of really sensible things that should be done and some really nice governance arrangements about how to think about doing them. But what are the special interests that stand in the way? And we should be thinking about those, and how can we negotiate those barriers? So what we really need is capitalism to survive, because it turns out it is the best system for allocating resources, but capitalism survives because we have a social compact that underpins it. So it's the acceptance of open markets, it's the acceptance that you've got free movement of people, capital and goods and services, at least within a nation state. And you need to have, democracy is about giving permission to do that. And so you think about what we had the 1920s, you had the antitrust legislation when capitalism got a bit too rampant, and it needed to be hauled back in and said, no, you can't rip off consumers that badly just because you've got monopoly powers, we're going to do something about that. You had Roosevelt's New Deal, which is, oh my gosh, half the population is starving to death, they've all been thrown off the farms, subsistence agriculture is no longer being supported, we need a new way of doing things. And then you have the Hawke-Keating Prices and Income Accord, which actually was about saying, yes, we're going to move to a more capitalist system, a more market-based system, but we're giving you a social compact to try and balance that out a little bit. So that's where I think that, the CEDA report is a really great starting point, but I think there's another conversation that needs to continue on from there. So thank you very much.